Hello, my name is Renee Bowling, and I am a doctoral student at The Ohio State University. Today, I'm going to be speaking about cultivating capacity to engage with religious, secular, and spiritual diversity. This goes by the acronym RSS in the literature in recent years and can refer to identities, communities, worldviews, and/or lenses of meaning making. So I hope the significance is clear for our field with students who are engaged in their own identity development as scholars and as people. I did want to briefly mention my own positionality and connection to this work. I am a white Christian who has worked as an expat in South Asia, as well as in the US, and done training internationally. And that is a problematic identity to have in many post-colonial spaces in doing work that engages with religion, secularism, and spirituality. And so I wanted to draw attention to that and name it right up front. My connection to this work has been involved in a project to decolonize religious education curriculum in South Asia. And I've also worked on and tangential to several projects that involve RSS support and RSS and interfaith development and climates on campuses. I'm going to be speaking about cultivating capacity for engagement with RSS diversity through awareness, affinity, and action. So ways in which we can raise our own awareness, look for opportunities to build coalitions and opportunity with other conversations happening on our campuses, and beginning points for action. I take an ecological perspective to this, viewing the campus as embedded within the local and regional context and within a wider body of theory and research that's happening globally. I also view religion and spirituality in this way as dynamic, embedded in, and interactive with contexts. So there's intersectionality with history, culture, geopolitics, and power. And I think that's just helpful to name that's how I approach this at the beginning. I don't view religion, secularism, and spirituality as isolated spheres, but very much as dynamic and interconnected. This image at the bottom left-hand corner is of a seed that has found its way onto a rooftop. And I think it is symbolic of the way that religion is interacting with environments, climates, and many different factors for our students and on our campuses. So I'm going to speak a little bit to theory and research background that I've had exposure to, under the assumption that not all of us have a lot of background in spiritual development theory. Even if you've had the luxury of taking a holistic student development theory course at some point, odds are it did not cover religion or faith development, or if it did, it was very much a stage-based model from old white men looking mostly at Christianity. And I'm happy to say that that's not where the field is these days. Now, spiritual development, like many other aspects of student development theory, is thought of much more dynamically, multidimensionally, and not prescriptive for any one type of group. Spirituality has come to be defined in the field as a combination of relationship and transcendence. And by transcendence, the idea is transcending the self. That can be with a relationship through the divine, or transcendence with the universe, reality, ultimate reality, or humanity or a cause. Spiritual development has, I've mentioned, evolved a bit over time. And now, if you want to look further into that, I would recommend looking at Love and Talbot and their work, as well as Benson et al., who have done some recent work cross-culturally on this topic. I wanted to bring to particular attention the interfaith learning and development framework, which is about how students grow in their own worldviews through interfaith interaction with diverse worldviews. I think that has particular relevance for our work internationally. There's also a newer concept of religious culture. Sachi Edwards is the author of this. If you would like to learn some more about how to center religious practice and community over belief, which is a more Western construct. There are, fortunately, some critical religious perspectives in the mix these days, folks who are looking at religious privilege and power. In the West, this will be Christian privilege and secular privilege, and then in Islamic societies, Muslim privilege is also beginning to be talked about as well. These scholars take issue with how religion has come to be defined through a very colonial process that has othered those in the Orient. And one way of thinking about it is that religion, spirituality, and secularism provides an opportunity to highlight indigenous and spiritual knowledges. These folks also are interested in making sure that there's a location of support for minoritized religious identities and communities on campus, and that we're thinking about the barriers they have to overcome to access accommodations or support. And then there are some empirical studies that have been recently or are ongoing. The Ideals study in the US and UK, which is a longitudinal interfaith study of students. The Inspires Index is a project I'm currently associated with, which is a Worldview Campus Climate Index tool that's being created. And then Benson et al. Have done a study normed across 60 countries, so cross-cultural, multi-religious, that has been looking at spiritual development profiles of students cross-culturally. And they have found that students do develop spiritually regardless of having any religious affiliation. And that's pretty interesting work that's been happening on the scholarly level in this field. Wrong way there. All right, and then I also wanted to speak about cultivating capacity through affinity and how we might be able to enter the conversations already happening on our campuses and to bring up the matter of religious, secular, and spiritual diversity. Some of these areas that I've highlighted include diversity, equity, inclusion, which goes by many names, global learning, which would include critical global citizenship and intercultural competencies, the idea of international higher education for society as a public good, and decolonizing international higher education. So I've got some citations there if you'd like to read more on any of these from any of these authors. But I think this is an imaginative way for us to think about where RSS diversity might fit on our campuses and conversations that are already kind of hot topics on our campus. And finally, through action, which in a good decolonial perspective begins with being self-reflexive. I would encourage you to pause the screen if you would like to spend a little bit more time on any of these, and then just pick back up with us. The first is to reflect on your own journey of spiritual development, including the influences and interactions that have shaped it today. So you can draw, you can map, you can use a Google Jamboard, whatever works for you to process this first journal prompt. Second, I invite you to journal about your institution's engagement with religious, secular, and spiritual diversity through identifying the different currents that are intersecting with one another and where religion is at play, as well as to consider how power interfaces with those. And then finally, to consider what assumptions are underlying your institution's engagement with religious diversity or its lack of engagement with religious diversity. And then for the third prompt, I invite you to consider what your role might be in fostering religious understanding, advocating for equity, and or supporting students, particularly those students who might be religiously minoritized on your campus. And now this is not a reference list, but it is sources if you'd like to kind of take this further or deeper for yourself. How to become an interfaith champion on your campus, how to apply a critical religious studies lens to this topic. And this final piece is actually not religious in nature, but it is a tool for folks who would like to engage in decolonizing higher education, particularly those who are serving cross-culturally and are non-Indigenous. So people like me, for example, this is a really good workbook that gets at self-reflection as well as group reflection, really necessary starting points to do no harm in this area and to make sure that it is Indigenous folks who are leading the way in decolonizing projects. So I thank you very much for your time and attention, and my contact information is there if you'd like to learn more about any of these topics. Thank you so much.